All right, everybody, welcome back to the Resilient Edge podcast, where we explore real world stories, strategies, and lessons from those who face crisis, challenge, and change head on. Our goal today is to give you practical insights and inspiration to help you build resilience in work life and leadership. My name's Dave Weiner. I am your host, sometimes with the most, sometimes with the least. It happens, right? But really pleased to have on a really close and dear friend of mine and my training partner extraordinaire, I would call it, Jeff Caudill. Jeff is a seasoned law enforcement professional with over 40 years of service to the community here in Los Angeles. He is also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, and Jeff has really dedicated his life to public safety, public service, crisis negotiations, which is what I'm really excited to talk about today. And I think what else is important is training the next generation of our first responders. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Dave. Usually we're next to each other in front of a classroom.
This is true. This is
Yeah,
true.
this is like back to COVID days or something.
I know, right? It almost makes you think we should be doing some of our training via Zoom, although I don't think it would be nearly as impactful as
I'm never a huge fan of that. Face-to-face is the way to do it.
Of course, absolutely. Before we dive into our main course today of talking about crisis negotiations, and I know you have decades of experience at that, and something we were previously talking about is 40 years. Wow. That is an amazing service or career of service to the community and through a myriad of changes in law enforcement. What keeps you going? What really keeps you going in this space?
It's like the old adage, time flies when you're having fun. I've always enjoyed what I do. I continue to enjoy it, and I have a passion about it, especially about the negotiation side of the house. And I think as long as you do that, talking about resiliency and dealing with it, and the important balance that I have between my work life and my family life, again, it's something I enjoy doing.
I think that's super important, especially at a time when I would say there's a lot of law enforcement professionals out there that do love the job, but it's become a bit of a love-hate relationship sometimes, depending on the department you work for and other types of things. But I think you're absolutely right. I think passion is really, if you have a passion for something, you're going to wake up every day, regardless of what type of adversity you may experience, those kinds of things. But 4 years, wow, that's an amazing career of service. And I personally know that you love your job. I know that for sure because we work together a lot. So
Yes.
that's important. Obviously, one of the things that we're here to talk about today is really crisis negotiations. These are high stakes situations where, people are in crisis, they're having a bad day, and next thing you know, law enforcement is at their door. And there are times when they need to call out our patrol teams and everyone else. They need to call out specialized resources to make sure that that person comes out safely and is dealt with effectively. I know you go out on a lot of call outs. I know this because there have been times when we've been slated to teach and I get the text or the phone call, hey man, heading out to a call out.
But I always started with sorry,
That's
but
true.
okay, sorry is always first.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm abandoning you sometimes.
Not at all. Not at all. I know that if they're calling you, it's super important. But when you are called to a crisis situation, what's the first thing you focus on when you get there?
Well, I think you're gonna find this kind of interesting because before I get there, I realized years ago that a lot of times we get in our heads. We talk about tactical planning, so, all the planning and stuff that law enforcement do. And I notice as a negotiator, if I plan too much in advance and it doesn't go the direction I really think it should go or want it to go,
Mm.
you kind of get in your head. So even before I go to the call, I try to clear my head. I look at what the call is. We get a notification that tells us what the call is. And it's funny, when I teach across the country, and I teach here, I always tell people what I do before a call is I put on channel 38 on Sirius XM satellite radio, which is Ozzy's Boneyard. And I listen to classic rock and music that I enjoy. But I think I can do that because I'm comfortable in my skill set and I don't start questioning myself. I know the goal when we get there is to get the person to come out peacefully so they don't get hurt.
Mhm.
Anybody inside with them doesn't get hurt, and our guys don't get hurt. So the ultimate goal is doing that. So I know what the end game is, and I know how to get there. But the person that's in crisis that I'm talking with is really gonna have a say in how we get there. So I go in with a plan in my head saying, okay, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say this. It doesn't work well if the person doesn't respond how I assume they're going to respond. So I think being
Mhm.
the first thing I do is I recognize that I train a lot and I teach, and teaching is a great way of training myself. But I get myself in the right mindset and basically clear my filters of any gut, of any crap in there, and just go in with an attitude of, okay, let's see where this takes us.
So really, it's not having any preconceived notions before you arrive at the call. Even if you've handled a similar call in the past, they always don't turn out the same way, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody's different. Also, the thing that I learned years ago in law enforcement and talking about resiliency and people getting burned out is I realize I can't save the world. And I think a lot of people join this profession or the military thinking they're going to save the world. And when they realize they can't, they get disgruntled or they just don't deal with it. And I think the other thing is not being judgmental. I've negotiated with people that have killed police officers. I've just negotiated with a lot of different people. And it's not my job to judge what they did. That's left to others. And I think it makes it easier for me having the right mindset going in and then applying the skill sets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can only imagine that it's very difficult, to your point, to negotiate with somebody who may have killed a police officer, and now you are, trying to separate your personal from professional feelings and also trying to resolve the situation. So that at least for our listeners, that is certainly a struggle when you're dealing with somebody who's in crisis and or has committed a pretty heinous crime. So I would get that. Does that usually, so your mindset, does that usually make a difference for you when you get to the call versus maybe other negotiators that you've worked with or trained that may not have the same process that they follow?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, we have some really good negotiators in our department, and I've seen great negotiators across the country. But I think sometimes they get into their head a little too much. They doubt
Mhm.
themselves, and then we get into crisis. Law enforcement officers hate it when I tell them that we get in crisis too. And when you see me teach, you always hear me say, when emotionality is up, rationality is down. And in law enforcement, we need to be able to make rational decisions. So if we let our emotionality get into it, if I start trying to maybe judge somebody for what they've done or the names they're calling me, I'm going to get my emotionality up, my rationality is going to go down, and my skill set. One of the first things we teach new negotiators is the only thing you can control during a negotiation are your own emotions. And there's enough emotions in the room already that if we start letting ours play a role, we're not going to go down a really good path, usually.
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. So moving further into this, can you share a story or a call out maybe that you went to where you had to take some time to build trust? And after building that trust, that sort of changed the outcome of the situation. Because the reality is you'll get there and the set of circumstances is a certain way, and then it's going to take some time, which some people also don't understand. Some negotiations can go on for hours and hours and hours, but where has there been a time where you have were able to really build trust and then able to have a successful outcome?
Well, I think in a lot of the negotiations that have been successful, there's some level of trust.
Hmm.
Again, like you said, it does take time. I mean, if people were to imagine themselves really in a bad spot in crisis, it just doesn't stop. It just doesn't go away. So time Time is important, and time is usually on our side. And our SWAT team is really, really good about giving us time. But building trust, again, takes time. And by doing that, I'm really careful. And when I teach, I tell people never say the word trust me. I mean, if you were to go buy a car or do anything and somebody you didn't know said, trust me, would you trust them? Probably not. So what I like to do is build trust with the person over a period of time. And that could be the fact that I'm still talking to them, the fact that the SWAT team isn't coming in. Maybe I've met their needs. Maybe they need a bottle of water. Maybe they need some food. Maybe they need a cigarette. And over time, we do that. Maybe if they want to talk to somebody, I might get a recording of a family member. But I'm building trust by showing my actions. I'm not saying them, trust me. And then when we start working toward that exit phase and trying to get them out, and I say exit phase because we try to avoid the word surrender. You know, the male ego is a terrible thing. Dealing with veterans, I was in the Marine Corps. You know, I really don't know what that word means, surrender. Never heard it before. But building trust with the person that you can't give them your word that they're not going to be hurt as long as they follow the directions of the officers outside. And that's the bottom line. A lot of times, a lot of people that I'm dealing with feel that the officers are there, and especially depending on how heinous the crime is, and all we want to do is hurt them. And once you can build that trust with them, then where they start taking you at your word, that's the kind of trust we need. And we do that. And we do that by little actions. If I was negotiating with you, for example, and all of a sudden I said, you know, Dave, we've been talking for a while. Why don't we take a break? Or you say, hey, we need a break. And I said, okay, Dave, why don't we do that? Give me your word that when I call back in 10 minutes, that you're going to pick up. So I get you to give me your word that you're going to do something. And then I give my word. I give you my word. I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. And I don't call back in 8 minutes. I don't call back in 12 minutes. I call back in 10 minutes because I gave my word. And a lot of times when people keep their word, that builds the trust with that person. And when that person picks up the phone, when I call back in 10 minutes, I thank them for doing that. And I remind them, I really appreciate you doing that. You gave me your word you would, and you stuck by your word. That says a lot about who you are, because it does. We don't take it lightly. So a lot of times people get this misconception of us building trust is giving them all this crazy stuff you see in Hollywood, when it's actually the little things. Thanking them for comply. Maybe they were shooting at us when we got there. Now they're not shooting. I really appreciate you not shooting at us anymore. So that's what I tell the negotiators. It's not the big gotcha phrase or sentence that's going to do it. It's building and little signs of trust.
So it's more action oriented than verbally oriented in some ways, you know, because you're actually showing and demonstrating that you're trying to build trust with people. And I know we frequently discuss this in some of our trainings, which is kind of the phrases I know and I understand, right? I know we talk about that a lot. Those can be trigger words, right?
Well, they can. I mean, I've never been in a house with armored vehicles outside, with officers with automatic weapons and a helicopter flying over, potentially know I'm going to go to jail for a long time or something's going to happen. So for me to say I understand, I would say things like, I can see why you might feel that or might believe that or think that. But for me to use words like understand is you lose credibility, because how could you understand?
Yeah.
Two people can go through the same event in life. When we talk this, you and I teach, when we're talking about crisis, two people can see the exact identical thing. One might be fine and the other will be in crisis. And it's all coping skills and how people deal with things. So every person's unique. You have to accept that. So like you said earlier, maybe something worked one time, but it doesn't automatically mean it's going to work the next time. It might be a hook, which is something positive I can say for one person, or it might be a trigger. That same thing might be a trigger for another person, which is something I want to try to avoid, at least for a while.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my next questions, which is, in all of your years of negotiating, have you seen any common themes of things that generally work? Obviously, if you say one thing to one person, that can certainly be a trigger, but to another
All
person,
right.
that can be a hook. Are there any common themes that potentially are underlying out there?
Common themes when it comes to negotiating. Do you mean things that are like hooks all the time or triggers all the time?
Yeah, do you find that certain things kind of work in a lot of situations versus none?
Probably the biggest thing that can fall into either category is
Mhm.
family, especially children.
Okay.
So, say, for example, I'm talking to somebody and their emotionality's still way up, they're angry, and I bring up their children. Okay.
Okay.
And all of a sudden they're angry. I don't want to talk about my kids. Now, it's not that they don't want to talk about their kids because they don't love their kids. Is because they love their kids, they don't want to bring it up in the conversation. It's too painful for them at that time. So as time goes on, be it an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it might be, and now that the relationship's a little better, the rapport is built with the person, I can reintroduce the kids or the
Mhm.
family. Sometimes it's the spouse, sometimes it's the parents, a lot of times the kids. I can reintroduce that, and now it's a hook.
Okay.
So that's something that we teach. It's understandable that if a person's upset about something, it's not always a negative. I mean, if you were, most people in a critical situation don't want their kids involved in any way, shape, or form. But when it gets more to the emotional side and they're starting to think, and you bring the kids up, you know you're making progress because now they want to talk about the kids.
No, that's great. That's all great stuff. I think because we have a lot of different people that are going to be tuning into this, not necessarily first responders or mental health folks. There's obviously people that are going to see some of these episodes and just tune in that really have no background, but also want to understand how they can maybe apply some of the things that you do as a crisis negotiator to kind of their everyday lives, whether it's work or home. We always talk about in class, telling your significant other to calm down and things like that, which is always hilarious, right?
I do.
Stuff
I
like,
always give that test, calm down and
yeah,
relax. And the class
yeah,
laughs. And I've asked the people, does it ever work for you? And per person, they usually say no.
yeah.
And it's like, why do we still use it?
Hmm.
But we do.
So we do because we're not smart like that. But what lessons could you share with our listeners that they could apply just everyday conflict, because crisis kind of is on a spectrum, right? And
Mhm.
obviously there are some things that will never involve the law enforcement or mental health professionals, but sometimes people have crises at work, they have crises at home. So what are some things that you would recommend for folks, some skills, maybe skill based stuff?
Basically, the same thing we teach negotiators. I mean, start with simplicity. We talk about active listening skills.
Hmm.
And I think Stephen Covey put it best is when you need to listen to understand with the intent to understand, not the intent to reply. Because a lot of conversations, we're heated, the person's heated. First and foremost, they're not saying, we're not hearing everything they're saying. And
Hmm.
they're not hearing everything we're saying. So we clutter the space with a lot of back and forth and actually get nothing accomplished. But listening with the intent to understand maybe the reason for what the person is going through. Take a breath and then respond with that. Try to get better understanding of what the other person's saying, but more importantly, why they're saying that. It's very important. We listen to reply, we start formulating our answer,
Hmm.
why the person's talking. And if we're formulating an answer why the person's talking, we're not listening to everything being said. A good example is negotiators. In training, sometimes we see a negotiator, we'll have a role player, we'll do scenarios. And a role player might say something like, yeah, my wife's left me, the dog died, I'm losing my house, I've lost my job, I'm going to end it. And the negotiator won't hear, I'm going to end it, because they're formulating the answer. They're okay. What can I say about his wife? What can I say about his dog? What can I say about his job?
Sure.
And the end it part is probably the most important because he's talking possibly suicidal ideation. So
Yeah.
we need to listen clearly to everything the person says and why they're saying it. The second thing, I think one of the biggest things is understanding the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think the easiest, I mean, that's a deep dive. We could talk 2 hours on that.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest difference and the way to explain it is sympathy is feeling for a person, where empathy is more feeling with the person.
Mhm.
Sympathy, a lot of times in the situations we use, because a lot of them are down that dark rabbit hole. If I were to be sympathetic to a point, it almost sounds like pity.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry bad things happen to people. I really am. But using that sympathetic response is not getting that connection with the person. I mean, I always joke, and you've seen me joke in classes before, a sympathetic thing that parents will always do. And I don't know if your parents have ever done it. When you've done something when you were little and you've complained or something's come up, and instead of feeling emotionally with you, which is empathy, feeling with you, sometimes the thing is, well, when I was your age,
Mhm.
and then they tell you a story about a similar situation that happened to them. Now, if I'm telling you a story that's happened to me, this conversation is now about me. It's
Mhm.
not about you. And I'm trying to solve your problem based on my view of the world, the paradigm, and the way I see the world. Maybe something did work for me. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So you have to step back and feel empathetically with the person. I can't imagine what you're going through. And one of the analogies you've heard me say it 100 times is the youngest two I've ever talked to on the crisis line are two different 10-year-old boys. And when I was a counselor on the crisis line, and I have the class interject, why do you think that was? And they say abuse, they say bullying, they say whatever. And it was because their girlfriends broke up with them. And the class starts laughing and kind of chuckle. And that's the exact response I actually want to get from the class, because that's the response you can't have. Because now this person, even though the person's 10-year-old, I can say, well, when I was 10-year-old, there was this many girls. Oh, you're so young. There's other girls out there. It's a very sympathetic response. And saying, thank God, that sounds terrible. I can't imagine what you're going through. So empathy is more feeling with the person, bonding with the person. So I think that first part of listening to understand and then using an empathetic approach to it is always very helpful, because your story isn't their story. I've seen a lot of arguments in couples, and we use this when somebody dies, and couples will argue or fight. People argue or fight because you're not feeling the same way I am. Say if somebody close to us dies, and I might go out and mow the lawn, and my wife might be in the room crying. Now she's going to get upset because she doesn't think, obviously, I think it's a serious issue, where right now maybe I'm in denial. So understanding that grieving process and what different people are going through is very important. And that helps you lead to empathy
Mhm.
and doing that. The other thing is always tone. You can say a bad thing. I've made mistakes before negotiating, but my tone's been good and the sincerity's been there, the empathy's been there. So the suspect has forgiven me. Now, if you have the wrong tone and you say the right thing, but with a terrible tone, you're going to lose. It doesn't matter. It was the right thing to say. And again, teaching with you, sometimes I'll give the analogy. Think about a dog. Think about your dog. You can give your dog, when you give your dog praise, it's always with a calm, simple tone. Now, trying to give your dog the same praise, yelling and screaming at them, you're saying the right thing, but the tone is the wrong thing. So it just shows how more important the tone is than anything else. But again, a lot of the elements we talk about, like I said, treating the person as a human being is critical.
Agreed. I would also imagine that you could probably add patience to that list. Some of us are sometimes relatively impatient. We want to sometimes get to resolution quickly. And obviously in crisis negotiation, you have to be ready for sometimes the long haul versus something that could be very short. So I imagine patience would be part of that equation too.
Patience is a good thing. One of the things I like when it comes to patience, if you think about the person you're negotiating, it's somebody's mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, somebody's family member. And if this was my family member in crisis, I would take all the time in the world.
Sure.
So again, if you look at that person as somebody that's in crisis, and you would hope that your family members or friends or battle buddies from the service or fellow officers would be given the same compassion. It's easier to be patient. It really, really is.
Absolutely agreed. Very wise words from a wise man, right?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, I think you're wise, my brother.
Well, thank you.
Any last thoughts for our listeners about crisis negotiations or things that they can apply in their day-to-day or personal lives that you think might be helpful?
I think if you go through like training in the crisis negotiation, training a lot of stuff builds your confidence. In law enforcement, we get weapons training, we get driver's training. And again, they're all perishable skills. And if you don't practice them, you're not going to get proficient at it. So it's important to go out and practice and become proficient at whatever you choose to do. The other thing I would say is a lot of times when we get in a position, especially with officers, but family and friends too, we like to talk about we live for our resume, we don't live for our eulogy. And when I taught leadership on the department, that was a big part. About the third month of the program, fourth month of the program, I would have the students write their eulogy and read them the next time they came to class. And a lot of them complained, and it was really hard. But once they did it and were done with it, it was their favorite part of the class, or one of the favorite parts. And what that does is, if you live for your eulogy, because when we learned everybody's name and what they did the first day of class. 99% of what we learned about the person was during their eulogy. So if you live for your eulogy, you'll understand that what you're doing it because you enjoy, and that's how you want to be known. But especially in law enforcement or their job, I've worked here, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And it's not about that when it comes to the eulogy. So I think it helps keep people grounded in whoever they might be, and do things you enjoy, do things that you love, and how you want to be remembered will fall into place.
I love it. Again, those are wonderful thoughts. We are out of time, but I wanted to say,
Oh, so
Jeff,
soon.
I know so soon,
So
but Jeff,
soon.
thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciated your time and your wisdom. And to everybody out there, we will see you next time on the Resilient Edge.
Thanks, Dave.